تدعون إلى الإيمان فتكفرون قالوا ربنا أمتنا اثنتين وأحييتنا اثنتين فاعترفنا بذنوبنا فهل إلى خروج من سبيل فهل إلى خروج من سبيل ذلكم بأنه إذا دعي الله وحده كفرتم وإن يشرك به تؤمنوا فالحكم لله العلي الكبير هو الذي يريكم آياته وينزل لكم من السماء رزقا وما يتذكر إلا من ينيب فادعوا الله مخلصين له الدين ولو كره الكافرون رفيع الدرجات ذو العرش يلقي الروح من أمره على من يشاء من عباده يلقي الروح من أمره على من يشاء من عباده لينذر يوم التلاق يوم هم بارزون يوم هم بارزون لا يخفى على الله منهم شيء لمن الملك اليوم لمن الملك اليوم لله الواحد القهار صدق الله العلي العظيم أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد. دكتور باسم ثلاث صلوات.
For ladies, you can join. They already put the curtain up. So, ladies, you can come to the front, inshallah. And there are already seats provided. So, صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. النساء تحبون تقدرون تتفضلون هنا اكو كراسي خالين ان شاء الله. Does anyone know how to give them or should I wait or يلا. صلوا ثالثا على محمد وآل محمد. زين وين؟ هادي اجا قاعد يمك. Sorry, my son is a little cheeky boy. زين قاعد يمك. يلا. Because otherwise it's going to be earthquake. Anyway. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. صل على محمد وآل محمد. So today is actually the anniversary of the birth of Lady Zainab Salamullahi alayha. And it also coincides with one of the greatest campaigns that happened in the time of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, which was called Mu'tah. And in that campaign, which was between the Muslim newly born nation and the Byzantine Empire, which happened in Jordan today. And in that great battle, three of the main companions of the Prophet ﷺ were martyred. The most important of them was Ja'far al-Tayyar, salamullahi alayh. Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, who was the first cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, and of course the brother of Imam Ali alayhi salam from his father and mother. So this occasion basically today brings us to a lot of historical significance. The lecture today I want to concentrate on 3 lessons we can learn from Sayeda Zainab Salamullahi alayha. Before that I want to, which is a very good introduction to the topic, to allude about Ja'far al-Tayyar alayhi salam. Ja'far al-Tayyar is one of the characters that we rarely mention and we rarely talk about. What's brilliant about Ja'far, he was the second most important person who was actually helping the Prophet ﷺ from the youth. So Imam Ali alayhi salam was obviously number one, and we're talking about in the time in Mecca, and Ja'far al-Tayyar or Ja'far ibn Abi Talib was the second. It's very interesting when we see how Ja'far joined Islam. One day Abu Talib alayhi salam entered into his house and he saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam praying, and Imam Ali alayhi salam was praying behind him. This is before Islam becomes a public message, because I'm not sure how much historically you know, but Islam was delivered in 2 stages. The first stage, the Prophet ﷺ for a couple of years did not go public with the message. The message was only delivered to the close family until the Prophet ﷺ took the message to the public. So Ja'far is amongst the people who actually converted to Islam in his very young age, in the time where the message of Islam was still spreading to the very close circle around the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Abu Talib enters the house. He sees the Prophet ﷺ praying, and he sees Imam Ali alayhi salam praying to his right behind him. So then he looks at Ja'far and he tells him, go and be the second wing to your cousin. So then Ja'far went and prayed behind the Prophet ﷺ to his left, and that's how Ja'far actually started becoming part of the Islamic message. Then Ja'far played a key role, one of the actually main youth, because Islam at its beginning was actually dependent on the youth. The youth were some of them very close to the Prophet from his cousins. So Imam Ali, Ja'far are very prime examples. And also it was the youth who were slaves, so Bilal and his alikes. Also the youth who were from low socioeconomic class, like Ammar ibn Yasir and so on. And there were youth from the very high socioeconomic class, like Mus'ab ibn Umair and so on. Actually, Mus'ab, and I think the youth in the time of the Prophet would be a very beautiful lecture actually to talk about. Mus'ab ibn Umair, for example, is the one who actually went to Medina, and he's the one who converted most of the Medina, and the Khazraj and Aus, my own ancestors, who later became the Ansar. These people were converted mostly by Mus'ab. Mus'ab was a young fellow who was born to a very high family, in the highest class of society. He had extreme wealth because of his family, and he was extremely handsome and attractive guy who left all of that and left all the fun and enjoyment of being one of the richest and the most attractive youth of Mecca, and he joined Islam, where basically he was boycotted, his father disowned him, and later on the Prophet ﷺ sent him to Medina to spread Islam there, which was called Yathrib, by the way. That's the ancient name of Medina. And eventually this young fellow was the actual reason that the whole Yathrib converted to Islam. And not only that, they actually went and became the refuge for the Prophet ﷺ. And then they became the center point where Islam was established. Ja'far was another young guy who actually contributed a lot to Islam. When the Prophet ﷺ saw that the pressure of Quraysh and the Meccan people on the Muslims became too much, and a lot of people couldn't bear it. A lot of people actually died because of it, because basically Quraysh put economic sanctions. We hear about economic sanctions today. It's a very ancient method. If you don't like someone, you basically boycott them economically. There was a social boycott, so they wouldn't basically marry from them. They wouldn't, accept their marriage proposals. They wouldn't even greet them in public. They stripped them of their own wealth. So to the extent that a lot of the Muslims couldn't take it anymore. Obviously, the weak ones would have been tortured, like Ammar, for example. His own father and mother were killed, and they were the first two martyrs in Islam. So a lot of pressure started mounting on the Muslims' early days of Islam. The Prophet ﷺ had to choose somebody to take the weakest of the Muslims and take them for what's called the Hijrah to Habasha, where they migrate as refugees. And today when we see the refugees from Gaza and from Lebanon, this is something that Muslims have coped from day one, where they had to actually travel out of Mecca and out of Arabia as refugees. And the Prophet ﷺ chose Ja'far in the first mission in Islam, which is lead the people to safety. And then he led the people, the Muslims, the early Muslims, and they migrated to Habasha. Habasha is modern Ethiopia. So modern Ethiopia used to be a Christian nation back then, an empire actually. And Najashi was the king of that empire. Najashi was a righteous man. He was a Christian king who actually had a lot of ethics. And the Prophet ﷺ chose him in person because he said, even you see the conversation between, and have you guys watched the movie The Message? Film Saleh? It's really a beautiful portrayal of Jafar. So if you remember the scene where the Muslims enter into Najashi's palace, that is Jafar, the one who spoke to him and the one who recited Surah Maryam to him and the one who convinced Najashi against, by the way, Quraysh sent Amr ibn. Who wants to finish that? Who Quraysh sent? Who watched the message? Ahsant, Amr ibn al-As. Amr ibn al-As was known as the biggest and the smartest fox of Arabia. He was the actual politician of Arabia. To the extent later on, Amr ibn al-As, Muawiyah, in all his political maneuvering and great skills in dirty politics, actually had to bring Amr ibn al-As to help him against Imam Ali alayhi salam. So that's how brilliant Amr ibn al-As was. And we're not going to go into what happened in Siffin, but basically Imam Ali won the battle, and then Amr ibn al-As, through his mockery and through his very brilliant skills in politics, he turned the table around. So that's Amr ibn al-As. So the person who they sent to seek, so that Najashi rejects the Muslim refugees, was not a normal, ordinary ambassador that would have gone and just going to talk to the king and give him some gifts and try to convince him. He was the most brilliant politician and ambassador in Arabia. And then Ja'far's brilliance shines when he has to lead against such a heavyweight. Do you see the point? And Amr ibn al-As was much older than Ja'far and much more experienced. He was always the ambassador of Quraysh, where Ja'far was never an ambassador. He didn't have much experience. But you see his brilliance shining in that huge encounter with one of the most brilliant political minds of Arabia. And that shows how Ja'far was impactful. And the truth that he carried and how much he was passionate that the king converts immediately and accepts them as refugees, and actually goes with his very famous quote, which also the movie portrays very well, says the difference between what Muhammad is bringing and what Jesus brought is just little fine line. And he accepts Muslims. Eventually, by the way, Najashi actually converts to Islam. So this shows Ja'far's leadership. It shows his character. Then after Habasha, when the Prophet ﷺ eventually migrated to Medina, Ja'far decided to go back to Medina. The day that Ja'far arrived to Medina was the day that Imam Ali alayhi salam won Khaybar. I'm sure all of you have heard. Everything connects to nowadays. So the day that Imam Ali alayhi salam could win against the Zionists of the time in Khaybar was the same day that Ja'far entered Medina coming back from Sham. So the news of Khaybar being the conquest of Khaybar was the same time arrived as Ja'far has arrived to Medina. The Prophet ﷺ, in a reaction to both the news arriving, he says, لا أعلم بأيهما أشد فرحا. I do not know which one of the two news is making me pleasant more, or I feel happier with more. Is it the return of Ja'far, or is it the conquest of Khaybar? And this shows how much the Prophet ﷺ loved Ja'far and held him in such a huge, because Khaybar was one of the hardest places to conquer for Muslims. And they tried many times until Imam Ali alayhi salam, and you all know how it happened, um, eventually actually won that huge castle. So then when Ja'far enters on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Prophet welcomes him, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam tells him, should I grant you a huge gift? Should I grant you the best gift? Should I grant you a wealth that you will never run out? Should I give you the greatest secrets for your um, for your needs? And Ja'far says, yes, of course, the Prophet. How can I not accept such a huge gift from you? All Muslims around and companions thought, what's he's going to give him? How much wealth is he going to give him? How much, how many acres of lands he's going to give him? He gave him what we till now, it's recommended on the daytime, and I really, really, really encourage you guys to do it. And I'll tell you about it, inshallah, on another occasion, or you can read about it. Salat Ja'far al-Tayyar. He taught him how to pray 4 rak'ats that has a special way of doing them. And that's actually called by the Imams as the Kibritul Ahmar. That means basically the chemical that dissolves any matter. So any matter, any sort of, sometimes we possibly have an exam that we're really struggling with. Sometimes we might have, a girl we really want to marry, or a boy we really want to marry, or we have other concerns in life as youth, or I really want to get that job, or I really want to do good in that interview, or my mom is really angry with me, I want her to be happy with me. Whatever it is that we have in life, Salat Ja'far al-Tayyar is known as one of the most brilliant acts of worship that you can do and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you actually see results very, very quickly. I know some of our scholars, like my father, actually praise it every night as nafila of Salatul Layl. Because Salatul Layl has 3. One has 8 rak'ats as you do nafila of Salatul Layl, and then you do shafa, which is 2 rak'ats, and then watr, which is 1 rak'ah. So some of our scholars actually do Salatul Ja'far in the nafila of Salatul Layl. So instead of those 4 rak'ats. The most time that's recommended for it, it's around the daytime of Friday. So around, let's say, an hour or 2 hours before Dhuhr time on Friday. That's the most brilliant time for it. But also it's a prayer that you can pray at any time. Anyway, you can read Mafatih al-Janan or any of your apps. They all talk about Salat Ja'far al-Tayyar. So Ja'far al-Tayyar, salamullah alayhi, with such character, eventually the Muslims had to face in Jordan the Byzantine Empire. Who was the first person that the Prophet ﷺ thought of? The Prophet couldn't send Imam Ali alayhi salam because it was too far away, and Imams needed always next to the Prophet ﷺ, and also all the struggles around him were too major, and you didn't know who was going to attack Medina at what time. So he had to send the second person he trusts the most, and that was Ja'far al-Tayyar. And he went and brilliantly fought in that battle until he actually was killed. The way he was killed is that he lost his right hand while he was in the battlefield. Then when they chopped off his right hand, he started fighting with his left. And for anybody who knows sword fighting, you have to be extremely skilled to know how to fight with your left exactly the same brilliance as your right. So they eventually chopped off his left, and eventually they killed him, which is very similar to Abbas alayhi salam. And that's why Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says that my uncle Abbas has given the same status as my uncle Ja'far in the Day of Judgment. So when the news came to the Prophet of his martyrdom, the Prophet said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replaced him, instead of his 2 hands, with 2 wings where he can fly in the heavens with malaika. So again shows how Ja'far was a very special person, and till his last day when he died, he always was the man that the Prophet ﷺ relied on for the most tasks that needed brilliance, needed leadership, and needed a lot of compassion as well. Because whether it was a peace seeking one where you actually have to take refugees and seek refuge in a foreign land, which was needed a lot of brilliance, a lot of compassion, a lot of resilience, or you actually go and face the enemy in the battlefield, which needed a lot of bravery and a lot of strong characters. Now, the son of Ja'far, Abdullah ibn Ja'far, married Zainab al-Hawra, salamullahi alayha. And here shows how great Ja'far is, that Imam Ali alayhi salam accepted to give his most precious daughter, and we all know who Lady Zainab alayhi salam was, to the son of Ja'far, Abdullah ibn Ja'far. And by the way, the grandsons of Ja'far, so Muhammad and Aun, who were the sons of Abdullah ibn Ja'far and the sons of Zainab al-Hawra, both were martyred in Ashura with Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So a brilliant family with a brilliant history. Now Zainab alayhi salam is another great characteristic of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, which displays the same characters as her uncle Ja'far. Brilliance, both as an ambassador, because we shouldn't forget that Zainab alayhi salam was the ambassador of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Zainab alayhi salam was the media. Zainab alayhi salam was the one who was leading the message of Imam Hussein that is stayed till today. If Zainab was taken out of the equation, by the way, neither me or you knew anything about Imam Hussein more than just a great character in history. We have to understand this. So Zainab alayhi salam's brilliance was not just another lady who did a great job. She had a task, very similar to Ja'far. The two tasks that Ja'far did, she actually put them together. One, my family is now under your care. So she had to show a lot of compassion. She had to show a lot of empathy. And this is the first lesson I want us to talk about, because I want to concentrate on three lessons that we actually learn from Ja'far and Zainab as two great examples for us to be actually learning from. And both of them were showing these characters since their young age, by the way. We're not talking about only in their adult life. The first and most important task of Zainab alayhi salam was to take care of the family. Now, we're not talking about taking care of the family while you're sitting at home and you have your own, servants, and you have your own, furnished house, and you have services, and you have everything at your disposal. We're talking about her taking care of people that going through exactly like what we see now, and unfortunately these images became daily occurrences. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help the oppressed people in Gaza and Lebanon. This is the situation where you had, and I'm sure a lot of you are, familiar now with these images. It's very, very unfortunate for us to say it, but we became familiar with these images these days, where you see these kids who just lost their loved ones. You see these women who were just widowed, and you see the huge emotional and the huge mental burden that these people have, the fear they're living with. She had to show passion, and she had to care for them in that circumstances. In those circumstances, she had to be their strength. She had to be their pillar of support. So this shows how much passion she had in her life. It showed how much care she had. And that actually brings us to the lesson that we have to learn from. When one of my brothers, when one of my sisters, when one from my community, when my colleague at work, when my fellow at uni or at school is going through a lot, maybe I have to go and say, are you okay? If they're going through too much, maybe I can be that support or that shoulder they can lean on. And that's how Ahlul Bayt all were like that. And that's how Zainab alayhi salam was. Very similar to how we said how Ja'far was, when he had to lead these oppressed people out of the misery into refuge. And there is nothing worse than being displaced and you seeking refuge. A lot of your own parents have gone through it. I went through it as a child. Of course, we Iraqis are very well versed when it comes to displacement and refugees. Um, it is one of the most vulnerable, one of the weakest situations, and one of the harshest circumstances. Then, 10 times worse, because these widows and these orphans were taken as captives by the enemy. So they weren't seeking refuge, even in the case like where you just want to kid somewhere and you're going to get protected. They were actually, as some people refer to what's happening now, as PTSD without the P, because post-traumatic stress disorder usually happens after the trauma finishes. But when the trauma continues, it's really another trauma on top of that trauma. So how can every one of us show that passion, that care to other people around us? And trust me, it's not only about their mental health, your mental health will feel better. When we help each other, when we are standing for each other, when we show passion, when we show compassion, when we show empathy, we actually start feeling better. And trust me, try it. When you show empathy to others, you suddenly feel happier in your life. You feel more satisfied in your within. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, I'm not going to even talk about the rewards and the great honor that awaits you the day of judgment. And not just in the day of judgment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this concept of karma that we hear, that's actually an Islamic concept as well. When you do well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says, if you do a little, the size of a seed of goodness, Allah will give you that goodness back. If you do a size of a seed of evil, you will also get the results back. So the consequences of good action is always there. The second thing we learned from her is resilience. You see, despite everything that happened to her, when she faces Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, la'natullahi alayh, he says her, how did you see what happened to you guys? How did you see what Allah has done to you? She answers in the most brilliant quote that I'm sure all of you know about it very, very well. ما رأيت إلا جميلة. I did not see but beauty. What are you talking about? That's resilience. That's when you see people being massacred, but you still believe that at the end of the day, truth will win, whatever happens to us. And that resilience is needed in our daily lives as well. Not in major issues as well, of course, when we're facing what's happening around us, obviously we need that resilience, but also we need it in our daily life. For example, let's say I got the exam results today and I wasn't doing well. I failed it, even. Let's go even further. The end of the world, it looks in my eye. I start crying. I don't want to talk to anybody. I might be avoiding my mom and dad because I'm too embarrassed to tell them that I failed my test. Well, get what? If you tell yourself, this should be my motivator to do better, this should motivate me to work harder, this should be a test, because it's a test. Why it's a test? Because I'm supposed to see where did I fail and what are my shortcomings that not allowing me to get that result that I already wanted. So why don't I learn from it? And by the way, life throws a lot of tests at us. It tests us in our friendships, it tests us in our knowledge, it tests us in our skills, it even tests us in our patience. Sometimes I lose it. My mom tells me, stop playing Xbox, stop playing with the PlayStation. A few times until I lose it and I might shout or I might say something, Mom, you're being too much. I wish I wasn't here. Some even go further and I wish I had a different mom. Come on, we've all seen it. These reactions, how can I teach myself? How can I take myself out of that situation? Give myself time out, calm down, and learn from that experience. We all do mistakes. So resilience is not only when things go wrong around me and others actually cause me harm, that I stand up again and I learn from that lesson and actually face life stronger. It's also when I do mistakes, I learn from my mistakes and I stand up again. That's resilience as well. Because resilience means how can I stand up again after I fall? That's what resilience is all about. And despite the fact Zainab saw that Imam Hussein alayhi salam fell on the day of Ashura, she made him stand up again. It was Zainab that made Imam Hussein stand up again. And if you see now 20 million people every year and hundreds of millions more around the world love Imam Hussein and walk towards him, that is because of Zainab. So resilience actually pays off. It pays off in many magnificent ways. The third lesson I really want to talk about Zainab alayhi salam is how brave she was. And she would say the truth no matter the consequences. And obviously, you have to be smart about it and say it in a way where you protect yourself. And she was displaying that character, which is again similar to what we talked about Jafar. Well, he was that passionate guy who took care of refugees and who took them and started representing them to make sure that they end up in the safe place. He was the brilliant military leader who actually went into the battlefield and he fought with strength and bravery. That's how Zainab alayhi salam was. When she needed to be passionate, when she needed to be taking care of her friends, when she needed to take care of her family, she was that soft person, that shoulder that they lean on. But when she needed to defend her family, when she needed to defend her faith, when she needed to say the truth, then she was a strong character that needed to be. So a Muslim always has to be one of two. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Quran says it very beautifully. رُحَمَاءُ بَيْنَهُمْ. That means they have mercy towards each other when they're dealing with each other. But when they face the enemy, they have a great characteristic. They have a great strength. So it's very important to learn the last lesson from Zainab alayhi salam that I want to emphasize tonight. And that is, how can I also be a brave person to face adversary? So it's not only how can I take care of myself, which we talked about, resilience, and actually stand up again, and take care of the people around me, which we talked about, passion, but also how can I make sure that I'm strong in character, I'm strong in my beliefs, I'm strong in my determination, in everything in life, by the way. I'm not talking about faith. Faith enters into everything in our life. How can I be strong in my studies? How can I be strong at my work? How can I be, how can I be known in my work as this person that we can rely on? How can I, when I see, for example, one of my colleagues or one of my fellow friends being oppressed or being bullied, how can I stand up for them? The bystanders who actually watch what happens from either bullying to others or hate or discrimination, standing up, that's bravery. And that's alayhi salam, Zainab alayhi salam showed that in very brilliant way. So really what we want to concentrate on tonight, and using Jafar and Zainab, so a male and a female figures from Ahlul Bayt, as very primary examples for us, is one, how can I look after myself? And how can I learn from my mistakes in life? Because we all do mistakes, no one is perfect. Other than the Imams and the Prophets, nobody is perfect, by the way. Yes, we all seek to be for excellence. We all want to be excellent in everything we do, but none of us is perfect. Every single human being does mistakes. Every single human being falls. Every single human being will sometimes misjudge things. What matters the most is what do I do after I actually made that mistake. And that's what resilience is. That's what learning and moving on is. But also, every single one around us one day will face some sort of struggle. Then how can I be that passionate person and carer that actually can help them to go through what they're going through? And thirdly, how can I make sure that I'm always a brave person? Social justice we talk about all the time, but social justice has many ways. and many ways of actually delivering that message. So inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the strength and the wisdom and the brilliance to really display these characteristics in our daily lives. Today, when I was trying to put some notes down, I put it as poetry. I always tend to do that when I'm trying to put anything together. It becomes poetic somehow. So I'm just gonna read it to end the lecture with. On Zainab's day, we stand and see her strength and grace, a legacy. In the face of grief, she did not bend, a voice for truth, her life to defend. When I stand for justice, I will not fall. Her words a beacon, a light to all. Through trials harsh, her faith stayed true, a torch of light in all she knew. In every storm, her heart stayed kind, with empathy for all mankind. She showed us how to lend a hand and help the weak across the land. Her words were sharp, a sword of light. Against the wrong, she'd always right. Fear not the tyrants, she would say. Truth will emerge come judgment day. And when the tyrant asked in vain, did you not see the blood and pain? She answered with unwavering grace, I did not see but beauty in this case. With knowledge, courage in her quest, she sought the truth and gave her best. A voice of justice bold and clear, to stand her faith without fear. So let us learn from her today and walk the path she chose to lay. With strength, compassion, justice true, we'll build a world that's bright and new. And inshallah, every one of us builds that world around them, because if every one of us does build that world around them, we're actually preparing ourselves for Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. We always have to remember that when we see these situations around us, when we see the unfortunate calamities that's befalling today everywhere in the world, we should be remembering that actually Ahlul Bayt and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam have emphasized that our true relief is through the return of our Imam alayhi salam. And we know that the return of our Imam alayhi salam is also related to us preparing ourselves for him. And how can you prepare yourself better than to be like Ja'far for him when he comes, to be like Zainab for him when he comes? So this actually includes both of us, male and female. We all can learn from Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam to prepare ourselves for that day, in order for us to, inshallah, have the great refuge and to have the great honor of being of the companions of Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. Let's all together recite Dua al-Faraj. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه